The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee and something else underneath, something older, the particular exhaustion of a person who had been grinding themselves down for so long that the grinding had become invisible. Nora Vasquez stood at the foot of bed 7 in the cardiac step-down unit of St. Augustine Medical Center, her third shift of the day beginning at 11 at night, her second cup of convenience store coffee cooling in the break room 2 floors below because she had not had 30 seconds to go back for it. She was 34 years old. She weighed 122 pounds, and 3 of those pounds were the dark circles carved under her eyes. She had been awake for 19 hours. The man in bed 7 had not yet looked at her. He was enormous. That was the first thing she registered. Not his chart, not the number on the monitor above his head reading 88/56, not the IV running potassium into his left forearm. He was enormous the way old-growth timber is enormous, the kind of size that makes a hospital bed look like furniture built for a child. His arms were sleeved in ink from wrist to shoulder. Even supine, even with oxygen tubing crossing his upper lip and a hospital gown stretched wide across his chest, he radiated the particular gravity of someone accustomed to occupying space as a statement of intent. His hair was mostly gray, pulled back, and his beard covered the lower half of his face in a solid gray-white mass that hospital pillows had pressed sideways. The patch on his cut vest, folded over the visitor's chair beside the bed, was visible from the doorway. A skull with wings. Nora had grown up in Fresno. She knew what that patch meant. She checked his vitals without waking him, made her notes, and moved on to bed 8. She did not think about the man in bed 7 again for 3 hours. She was too busy. That was the truth of Nora's life in those days. She was always too busy to think about any single thing for more than the seconds it took to complete a task. She worked 36 hours a week on the cardiac step-down unit at St. Augustine. She worked 12 hours a week at an urgent care clinic in the Sunnyside neighborhood, the kind of clinic that saw a lot of uninsured families and not a lot of reimbursement. On Saturday mornings, she cleaned houses, 3 of them on a rotating schedule, mostly in the Tower District where the old Victorians sat behind wrought iron fences and the people inside them paid $80 for 3 hours of work and left the 80 in an envelope on the kitchen counter, as if the transaction were too unpleasant to perform in person. She cleared approximately $4,200 per month after taxes. Her rent was $1,800. Her mother's assisted living facility in Clovis cost $2,100. She had $300 left for groceries, gas, and everything else that constituted being alive. She had been living this way for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Not that she counted. The counting had started when the hospital administration informed the nursing staff that the cardiac unit would be consolidating 2 floors into 1, effective the following quarter, and that 15 full-time positions would be reduced to part-time. Nora had been among the 15. She was told she could keep her role but lose her benefits package. She was told it was restructuring, not personal. She was told by a man in a gray suit whose name she never learned that the decision had been approved at the executive level, and that she was welcome to speak with HR if she had questions. She did not speak with HR. She picked up the urgent care shifts. She found the houses. She stopped sleeping more than 5 hours on any given night and stopped noticing that she had stopped. Her mother, Elena, had been diagnosed with early-onset vascular dementia 18 months before the restructuring. Elena was 61. On her good days, she recognized Nora's voice and asked about the garden at the old house on Thielman Avenue, the house they had sold 6 years ago to pay down the credit card debt after Nora's father left. On her bad days, she called Nora by her sister's name, the sister who had moved to Phoenix and called on holidays and sent money twice a year. Not enough to matter, but enough to feel like a gesture, which was its own particular category of not enough. Nora did not resent her sister. She told herself this frequently enough that it had stopped feeling like a lie and started feeling like a decision. At 2:47 in the morning, the monitor above bed 7 alarmed. Nora was at the nursing station, entering a medication reconciliation, when she heard it, and she was moving before the sound fully resolved in her ears, which is the specific reflex that separates nurses who have worked cardiac from nurses who have not. The reading when she reached the room was 61/40. She called the rapid response number with one hand and adjusted his oxygen flow with the other, her mind running the differential without narrating it, the way a driver reads a wet road automatically, below language. The man's eyes open. They were a gray so pale they were almost colorless, like river water over granite, and they fixed on her immediately with a clarity that had no business being there at the end of a cardiac event. His lips moved. She leaned closer. "Settle down," he said. His voice was gravel compacted over decades into something harder than gravel. "I need you to stay still," Nora said. "I am still," he said. He was right. He had not moved anything except his eyes since waking. The rapid response team arrived in 4 minutes and 20 seconds and took over the physical space around him, with their equipment and their voices, and for the next 40 minutes, Nora moved in the choreography of an experienced nurse, in a controlled crisis, precise and economical, handing things before they were asked for, adjusting things that needed adjustment, anticipating the team lead's next request from the 3-second lag before she made it. When the man's pressures stabilized at 94/60 and the team lead declared him clear for now, Nora was already entering the documentation. She was back at the nursing station when she became aware that someone had come to stand at the edge of her peripheral vision and was waiting for her to notice him, with the patience of someone who has waited for things before and knows that patience is its own form of pressure. She looked up. The man from bed 7 was standing in the hallway in his hospital gown, his IV pole in one enormous hand, the oxygen tubing still in place, his bare feet on the linoleum. He had walked here from bed 7 on a blood pressure of 94/60, which was medically inadvisable and physically impressive in equal measure. "You need to go back to your room," Nora said. "You the one who called it in," he said. It was not phrased as a question. "Yes, that's why you need to go back to your room, because there will be more monitoring and more intervention if your pressure drops again, and you need to be in your room for that." He looked at her for a long moment with those pale river water eyes. "Name," he said. "I'm Nora. I'm your nurse for tonight." He looked at her for another moment with an expression she could not read. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway, his IV pole making a soft metallic sound against the linoleum, and did not look back. His name, according to the chart, was Dennis Rourke. He was 58 years old. He had been admitted 3 days ago after presenting at the emergency department with chest pain that turned out to be a hypertensive emergency on top of an undiagnosed aortic valve defect. The attending had him on a medication regimen that was stabilizing him, cautiously, and the plan was to keep him in the step-down unit for observation through the end of the week before deciding whether to escalate to surgical intervention. The chart also noted, in the social work intake section, that no family had been identified and that the patient had declined to provide emergency contact information. The cut vest on the visitor's chair had a name rocker below the skull and wings patch. It read, Rourke. It had a bottom rocker, too, the chapter name, and a center patch she had not been close enough to read clearly that first night. She did not get close enough to read it clearly the second night either. She told herself this was because she was busy, which was partially true. On the third night, a Thursday, Dennis Rourke was sitting up in bed with the overhead light on when Nora came in for his 11 o'clock check. He was looking at the vest on the chair, not doing anything with it, not moving toward it, looking at it with the particular quality of looking a person employs when the thing they are looking at is simultaneously present and very far away. "Your pressure's been steady today," Nora said, wrapping the cuff around his arm. "Good," he said. "The cardiologist wants to discuss the valve situation with you in the morning, 8 o'clock. "I know." The reading came back at 102/66. Improvement. She noted it. "You work nights," he said. Not a question. "Yes?" "You work somewhere else, too. Daytime." She glanced up. He was watching her. "Urgent care," she said, because denying it felt pointless. "And some weekend work." "3 jobs," he said. She did not answer. She set the cuff down and made the notation. "My mother had 3 jobs," he said. "Never complained about any of them." Nora looked at him. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the vest again. She left him to it. The conversation, if it could be called that, had lasted less than 4 minutes. She thought about it twice in the following days between tasks, in the 30-second gaps that were all she had for thinking. She thought about the way he said it. "My mother had 3 jobs," not as a comparison, not as sympathy, just as a statement of fact offered without expectation of any response. The way men who have spent long years in their own company sometimes speak, not to communicate, but to make something real by saying it aloud. Dennis Rourke remained in bed 7 for 5 more days. The cardiologist scheduled a minimally invasive valve repair for the following Monday. In those 5 days, Nora learned several things about him, most of them by accident. He had no visitors. He made 2 phone calls in the hours she was present, and both were brief, less than a minute each, his voice low enough that she caught only tone, not words. He read. He had a paperback with a broken spine that he read in the same focused way he did everything else, with a stillness that was almost meditative. On the 4th day, she came in for his evening check and found him standing at the window looking out at the hospital's east parking structure. And when she entered, he turned around without startling, which meant he had heard her footsteps in the hall and tracked her to the door before she opened it. A habit of a man whose relationship with his own environment was a matter of survival. She had grown up in Fresno. She was not naive about what that meant, what kind of life it pointed toward. On the 5th day, a Saturday, she was not scheduled at St. Augustine. She was cleaning the 3rd house on her rotation, a craftsman bungalow on Maroa Avenue owned by a woman named Patricia, who ran a small landscape architecture firm and was meticulous about the kitchen tile grout in a way that added 20 minutes to every visit. Nora was on her knees with a grout brush at 1:45 in the afternoon when her phone rang. The Sunnyside Clinic, the urgent care, which she was not scheduled at until the following Wednesday. She answered. The clinic manager, a woman named Rosa, who had been running the front desk and half the administrative functions of the clinic for 11 years, and had the contained authority of someone who had survived 17 different office crises without raising her voice, told her that Dr. Meredith had called out sick, that the clinic had 47 patients booked for the afternoon, and that the per diem doctor they used for emergencies was on his way to Sacramento for a family event and could not be redirected. She asked Nora if she could work. Nora set down the grout brush, looked at the remaining section of kitchen tile, calculated the time, and said yes. She worked the clinic until 7 in the evening. She drove home, showered, ate a bowl of leftover rice and beans standing over the kitchen sink, and went to bed. She set an alarm for 4:50 in the morning because she had a 12-hour shift at San Agustin starting at 6. She slept for 4 hours and 38 minutes. In the weeks that followed, she would sometimes try to identify the exact point at which the machinery started coming apart, the way you will pick at a garment's loose thread looking for where the seam originally failed, and she could never locate it precisely. Things had been fraying for years. The specific unraveling that mattered began on the Tuesday morning, that her bank account showed a balance of $47 8 days before her next paycheck, and the Clovis facility called to inform her that her mother's fee had been declined. She was standing in the hospital parking garage when she took that call, still in her scrubs from the night shift, her coat open against the February cold. A February in Fresno being a specific kind of gray that makes the mountains visible on the horizon as a compensation for the fact that everything at ground level is the color of old concrete. The woman on the phone from the facility was a billing coordinator named Sandra, whose voice was professionally gentle in the way that all billing calls are professionally gentle, which meant it was not gentle at all. And what she said in that voice was that the February payment had declined, that this was the second month in a row it had been late, and that per the facility's policy, a third missed or declined payment would result in a 30-day notice of required relocation. Nora's mother was in a memory care unit. Relocation meant disruption of routine. For a person with vascular dementia, disruption of routine meant acceleration of decline. The research on this was not ambiguous. Nora said she would resolve the payment within 48 hours. She hung up. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 6 minutes, which was 6 minutes she did not have, and she did not cry because crying required a kind of internal leisure she had not been able to afford for months. And then she started the car and drove home. She had 3 days off from St. Augustine and 2 shifts at the urgent care clinic in the next week. She called her sister that evening, and the call went to voicemail. She called again the following morning and got 3 rings and a hang-up, which was the particular cruelty of someone actively declining a call. She called again that afternoon, and her sister picked up and said she was in a meeting, and could she call back? And Nora said she needed to talk about their mother's facility payment. And there was a pause long enough to have its own weather system, and then her sister said she would call her back tonight, and did not. The credit line she applied for online was approved at a limit of $2,000. That covered the facility payment for February and the late fee. It solved nothing past the end of March. Dennis Rourke was discharged from St. Augustine on the Wednesday after his valve repair, which had gone without complication, according to the surgical team. The repair required 2 nights in the cardiac ICU and then a transfer back to the step-down unit. And by pure schedule, chance Nora was working his last 2 nights there. He was quieter post-surgery, more contained, his energy directed inward in the specific way of a person reconciling themselves to physical vulnerability, which is a hard thing for a certain kind of man. On his last night, she came in at midnight with his midnight medications and found him awake, the room lit only by the monitor glow and the parking garage lights through the window. She handed him the small cup. He took it without looking at it, and tipped it back and handed the cup to her. "When do you sleep?" he said. His voice was lower post-surgery, roughened by the intubation. "When I can," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "How many hours last night?" "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't ask if you were fine," he said. She counted back. 4 hours, she said. 4.5. He did not say anything. He looked at the window, at the amber smear of the parking garage lights on the glass. She finished her notes. "You got family," he said. "My mother. She's in a care facility in Clovis." A pause. "Sick?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. That costs. It was not a question. It was a recognition, which was something different, something that landed in the chest differently. And Nora found she had nothing to say to it, so she said goodnight and left the room. Dennis Rourke was discharged at 10:20 the following morning. Nora was at the urgent care clinic by that time. She did not see him go. She came home that evening to find an envelope under her apartment door. It was a plain white envelope with her name written on the front in a handwriting that was large and angular and slightly unpracticed. The handwriting of a person who does not write many letters. Inside was a card. The card had no printed text on it, just a plain white rectangle, and on it was written in the same large angular hand, Bed 7. Under that, a phone number. Under that, use it. She sat with the card for a long time at her kitchen table. She thought about what she knew and what she did not know. She knew Dennis Rourke was a Hell's Angel. She had been close enough to the vest on his last evening to read the center patch clearly, the full death's head and the full bottom rocker, the Charter City. A charter out of Stockton, 38 miles north. She knew he was a man who asked specific questions and paid close attention to the answers and had, in the 5 days he was her patient, constructed an accurate portrait of her life from very few data points. She knew the card was an offer of some kind, though she could not name the shape of the thing being offered. She also knew that she had $47 in her bank account, a declined facility payment, a sister who did not answer the phone, and 4 days before she would have to begin the process of finding somewhere else for her mother to live. She propped the card against the sugar bowl on her kitchen table and looked at it while she ate her dinner, which was a can of tomato soup and half a sleeve of crackers. She went to bed without calling the number. She woke at 3 in the morning with the specific clarity that sometimes arrives at 3 in the morning, the kind that does not feel like waking, but like a door opening. She lay in the dark for 17 minutes. Then she got up and called the number. He picked up on the second ring. "You didn't have to call this late," he said. He did not sound like a man who had been asleep. "I wasn't sure about calling at all," she said. "But you did." "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I want to be clear about that." He said. The sound was non-committal, not dismissive. He let the silence work for a moment. "You know who I am." "I know what you are," she said. "Or what the patch says you are." "Same thing." "Maybe," she said. "That's what I'm trying to decide." A pause. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Still low, still gravel, but with something underneath that had not been there before. "You pulled me back from a bad place the other night. The 2:47 alarm. I know what happened. I know what my pressure was. I know what it means when it goes that low." Another pause. "You move fast." "That's my job," she said. "Other nurses were in that building," he said. "Job was all of theirs, too." She had no answer for that. "I'm not asking for anything from you either," he said. "I'm offering. There's a difference. You can tell me no, and I'll never contact you again, and that's that." "What are you offering?" she said. The answer he gave her took 4 minutes. He was not a man who spoke at length, so 4 minutes from him was the equivalent of 20 from someone else, and in those 4 minutes he laid out, without excess or decoration, what he knew about her situation and what he was proposing to do about it. The facility payment, the bank account, the sister in Phoenix who did not answer calls, the 3 jobs and the 4 hours of sleep and the grout brush on the kitchen floor of a woman named Patricia on Maroa Avenue. She stood in her kitchen in the dark with the phone at her ear and thought about how he knew those things. Not the financial ones. Those could be inferred. The Maroa Avenue house, the grout brush. You had someone watching me, she said. I asked someone to make sure you were safe, he said. That's not the same thing. It is the same thing, she said. A pause. Fair, he said. She stood in her kitchen. Through the window, the night was deep and cold, and the streetlight outside her building made a perfect circle of amber on the wet asphalt below. She had been staring at the card since she woke, and it was 3:40 in the morning, and she had a 12-hour shift starting in 2 hours and 15 minutes. Why? She said. The question was not rhetorical. She wanted the actual answer. The pause this time was longer than the ones before it. When he spoke, the roughness in his voice was still there from the surgery, and something else was underneath it that she recognized from years of sitting with patients in the hours after difficult procedures. The sound of a person deciding how much truth was safe to give. My mother worked 3 jobs, he said. She died on the way home from the 3rd one. Night shift cleaning at a hotel off the 99. Black ice. She was 62. Another pause. Nobody was looking out for her. Nobody thought to. The streetlight on the wet asphalt made no sound. Nora held the phone and did not say anything for a long moment. If I say no, she said finally. You say no and nothing happens, he said. You have my word. She looked at the card propped against the sugar bowl. The word word, from a man like Dennis Rourke, she understood, was not the same category of word as the word word from, for instance, the man in the gray suit from hospital administration who had restructured her benefits package. She understood this without being able to articulate precisely why she understood it. She just did. I'll think about it, she said. All right, he said, and hung up. She worked her shift. She came home. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she had slept in a single stretch in 3 weeks. And when she woke, there was a text message from a number she did not recognize that contained a 6-digit figure and a name. The figure was $10,000. The name was a credit union on Blackstone Avenue in Fresno that she had driven past 100 times without ever entering. She called the number. A woman answered, businesslike and warm in equal measure, and explained that an account had been opened in Nora's name and that a deposit had been made covering 3 months of her mother's facility fees in advance, along with a buffer. She explained that this was a gift, not a loan. She explained that nothing was required in return. Nora sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after hanging up. She did not call Dennis to thank him. She did not call Dennis for 9 days. When she called him on the 9th day, it was not to say thank you, though she said that too. It was because she had driven past a bar on the south end of Fresno, a low cement block building with motorcycles lined in the lot, like a formation waiting for orders, and she had slowed without meaning to. And she had sat in the turning lane for 30 seconds, watching the light until the car behind her honked, and she had driven on. And an hour later, she could not have told you why she had slowed. She called him, and he picked up on the second ring again, and she said, I have a question. Ask it, he said. What did you tell the woman at the credit union about me? A pause. I told her you were someone worth taking care of. She sat with that. I don't understand you, she said. You don't need to, he said. Get some sleep, Nora. She did not get some sleep. She stared at the ceiling for 40 minutes and then gave up and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with a card which she had kept, though she was not entirely sure why she had kept it, except that throwing it away it felt like a decision she did not have enough information to make yet. There were things happening in the world of the card and the man who had written it that she did not know about. She would learn about them later in pieces, and it would be a long time before the whole picture assembled itself. What she knew at the time was this. The facility was paid. The credit line was closed, paid off in the same week from the account at Blackstone Avenue. Her mother had had 2 good days in a row, days when she recognized Nora's face as well as her voice, and asked about the garden with a clarity that was painful in its detail. Painful because it was beautiful and because Nora knew it would not last, and held it carefully, the way you hold fruit that is just beginning to go. What she did not know was that a man named Philip Carruthers, who was the administrator of the Clovis facility, where her mother lived, had for 11 months been systematically overbilling families in memory care, padding invoices by 8 to 12% per billing cycle across 31 residents, the overcharges buried in a line item labeled administrative services that no one had questioned, because questioning it required a kind of attention and energy that families already stretched thin did not have available to spare. He had been doing this since his predecessor left, and doing it, he believed, invisibly. He had not accounted for the Stockton Charter's particular interest in Nora Vasquez's mother's facility. Nora heard Dennis's voice for the first time in 3 weeks on a Wednesday afternoon in early April, when she was coming off a double at the urgent care clinic, and her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. His message was 4 words: "Come by tonight. Address." The address was the cement block building on the south end of Fresno, the one with the motorcycles. She sat in her car in the urgent care clinic parking lot for 11 minutes. The street outside was the flat Fresno afternoon gray, the mountains clear on the horizon because the rain had washed the air clean. She was wearing scrubs, and she had not eaten since 8 in the morning, and she was 34 years old and alone and tired in the particular way that being tired for a very long time makes you tired, which is not just a body thing. It is a deep interior thing, a hollowing. She drove to the address. The lot held 14 motorcycles. She counted them as she pulled in, which was the kind of thing she did now, inventory as a form of control. The building's door was solid steel, painted dark red with a small square window at eye level. She sat in the car for a moment, then she got out. Before she reached the door, it opened from the inside, held open by a man she had never seen, who was built like 2 men in close formation, and had a beard so long it had its own gravity. He looked at her with a flat assessment that lasted 1 second, and then held the door wider without speaking. The interior was dim. There was a bar along the left wall, a row of stools, and a pool table, with the felt worn through at the left corner. The air held stale beer, cigarette smoke, machine oil, and something underneath all of it that was just age, the specific accumulation of years of the same people in the same space. There were 7 men in the room. 6 of them were at the bar or near it. One of them was Dennis Rourke, standing at the far end with a glass of water in his hand. Post-surgery still. 3 weeks out from a valve repair, standing with the particular, deliberate care of a man who has been warned about exertion and is making his own assessment of what that warning is worth. He looked at her when she came in and gave her a short nod. "Thank you for coming," he said. And the formality of it in that space, in that voice, was so unexpected that it landed differently than any formal greeting she had received in a long time. The men at the bar had turned to look at her. She felt the weight of it, 7 men's attention in a room with 1 exit, and she kept her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and did not look away from Dennis, which was not a strategy, just what felt true in the moment. "This is Nora," Dennis said to the room. Nothing more. No explanation, no context. The room turned back to what it was doing, with the exception of 1 man, heavyset, seated at the end of the bar, who held his gaze on her for a beat longer than the others. He had a president's patch. His name, she would learn, was Vic Hartley, and he was the reason she had been called here tonight, though not in the way she initially feared. What happened next Took 40 minutes, and it was the most specific and methodical 40 minutes she had experienced since nursing school, which was its own form of high-stakes precision work. Vic Hartley and a younger man named Dex, who had the look of someone who had grown up around computers and then grown up around other things, placed a laptop on a table in the back of the room and showed her three things in sequence. First, a spreadsheet. It was a billing summary for the Clovis facility, 31 residents, 12 months, the administrative services line isolated and color-coded in yellow. Dex had built it himself, sourcing the underlying billing records from a data request filed in Nora's name under the California Medical Records Access Act, a request that had been filed 3 weeks ago by a legal services organization in Sacramento that Dennis had a relationship with that she did not ask about. The overcharge on her mother's account across 11 months was $4,316. She looked at the number for a long time. "Your mother's not the only one," Vic said. His voice was blunt and unhurried. 31 families, all of them in memory care, all of them with someone too busy or too worn down to look at the line items. Nora looked at Dex. "How did you get these records?" "Legal request," Dex said. "Your name's on the filing. We helped you file it." "Without telling me," she said. "Without asking you first," he said. He met her eyes steadily. "That part, I apologize for." She looked at the spreadsheet again. $4,316. 2 years, 4 months, and counting. Of 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep and $47 in a bank account. And a mother who asked about a garden that no longer existed. "What do you want me to do with this?" she said. "Take it to the state licensing board," Vic said. "In writing, with all this attached. He loses his license, probably faces fraud charges. 31 families get refunded." "Why do you need me?" she said. "You could file this yourselves." "We could," Vic said. "Complaint from a Hells Angels charter goes in a different pile. Complaint from the nurse daughter of a victim goes on someone's desk on Monday morning." It was the most practical thing she had heard in a long time, and it cut through the fatigue and the uncertainty, the same way a reading of 61/40 cuts through everything except what matters. She looked at the spreadsheet. She looked at Dennis. He was leaning against the far wall, still with his glass of water, watching her with those pale river water eyes. He gave her nothing. No nod, no prompt, no indication of what he wanted her to do with it. He had laid the thing before her and stepped back. She looked at the spreadsheet one more time. "Print it," she said. Dex printed it. All 36 pages. She folded the pages into thirds and put them in the inside pocket of her coat, against her chest, where she could feel them with every breath. She drove home. She sat at the kitchen table with the pages in front of her, and she wrote the complaint by hand first, because typing it felt too fast for what it was, too impersonal for the weight of it. She wrote it in the voice she used for nursing notes, which is to say precisely, without editorializing, the facts and the dates and the figures, the pattern that emerged from them, the harm it had caused. She wrote for an hour and 20 minutes. Then she typed it, attached the spreadsheet, and sent it to the California Department of Public Health, the state licensing board for healthcare administrators, and the Consumer Fraud Division of the State Attorney General's office. She pressed send at 11:58 at night. She sat in the kitchen after. The building was quiet. Outside, the wet street reflected the street light in a long amber line down the block. She could feel the folded pages against her coat, still on the chair beside her. She thought about her mother's good days and the garden on Tileman Avenue and the woman who had worked 3 jobs and died on the highway, in the cold, 62 years old, and nobody looking out for her. She thought about the fact that she was 34 years old, And she had not taken a full day off in over 2 years. And she had not told anyone this because there was no one to tell it to who could do anything about it. And the specific quality of that kind of aloneness, the functional aloneness of being competent and invisible, the way it wears down something in the interior that you cannot name but can feel going. She was still sitting at the table when her phone buzzed. A text from Dennis's number. One word. Sleep. She laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, real and involuntary, and rusty the way a thing gets when it has not been used in a long time. She sat alone in her kitchen at midnight and laughed, and the sound of it surprised her, and she sat with it for a moment. The surprise of it, before it faded. She slept for 7 hours. Philip Carruthers received a certified letter from the California Department of Public Health 31 days after the complaint was filed. The letter informed him that an investigation had been opened into billing practices at the Clovis facility covering a period of 12 months, that he was required to preserve all relevant financial records, and that a site visit would occur within the following 30 days. He hired an attorney that same afternoon. He was not a man without resources. He had spent 11 months believing he was not a man who could be touched, and that belief had the particular stubbornness of a thing that has never been seriously tested. He found out who filed the complaint. In a memory care facility in Fresno County, in the world of billing administrators and long-term care regulators, the web of names is not large, and the person who had filed the complaint, Nora Vasquez, was on record as Elena Vasquez's emergency contact and primary family representative. He had her name from his own records. He called the facility's executive director. He called 2 members of the County Health Advisory Board, men he had cultivated over the years with golf outings and charitable donations. He made suggestions. The executive director called the Clovis facility's chief nursing officer, who called the facility manager, who called the care coordinator, assigned to Elena's unit. And in that chain of telephone calls, the message was not stated directly because it did not need to be, the way a current does not need to announce itself to move water. The message was that there would be a review of Elena Vasquez's care placement, a reassessment of her level of care designation, and that it was possible her current unit was not the most appropriate setting for her needs. The care coordinator, a woman named Renata who had been doing her job for 9 years and who knew exactly what she was hearing, said she would schedule the reassessment and hung up. She also, that same afternoon, called Nora. Nora was between patients at the urgent care clinic when she took the call. Renata spoke quietly and without identification, the way a person speaks when they are aware they are being overheard or monitored, and what she said was that a reassessment had been scheduled for the following week, and that Nora should be present and should bring documentation of her mother's care history. And then she said something that she did not need to say, but said anyway, which was, "The complaint you filed was the right thing to do." The call lasted 90 seconds. Nora went back to her patient. She called Dennis that evening. She told him what Renata had said. She told him what she understood to be happening, which was that Carruthers was attempting to use her mother's placement as leverage against the complaint. Dennis listened. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "All right," he said. "What does all right mean?" she said. "It means I heard you," he said. "And it means all right." She wanted to press him, but she heard something in the brevity of it that told her pressing was not the right thing to do. The same instinct that tells a nurse when a patient is at their limit of what they can receive, and pushing further will only close them off. She let it be. 3 days later, Philip Carruthers arrived at the Clovis facility for what he had scheduled as an unannounced review of the memory care unit. which was not an unannounced review at all, but a visit designed to perform oversight in a way that would be visible to the staff who had filed or might file supporting statements for the investigation. He was a compact man, mid-50s, in a charcoal suit that fit well, the kind of man whose authority lived in the suit as much as in himself, the suit being the container that organized everything else about him into its proper shape. The parking lot held 12 motorcycles that had not been there the previous day. He walked through the lot without allowing himself to slow. The men on the motorcycles did not speak to him. They were simply present, 7 of them, sitting or standing beside their machines in the morning light with the patient quality of a group that has arrived with no particular schedule and no particular urgency. Their cuts were visible. The patches were visible. He recognized what the patches were. He went inside. He completed his walkthrough of the memory care unit. He spoke to the facility manager in a voice that had lost 2 levels of its customary authority, without him being able to identify exactly where the loss had begun. He spent 45 minutes in the building. When he came out, the motorcycles were still there. He sat in his car for a long moment. His attorney called him that afternoon. The state investigator had requested an interview for the following Tuesday. The attorney recommended he cooperate fully, which is the kind of advice that sounds like the right advice until you realize it means there is no longer a path that involves not cooperating fully. He did not return to the Clovis facility. He hired a crisis communications consultant instead, which is the particular refuge of men who still believe the right framing will solve a structural problem. It did not solve his structural problem. The state investigation concluded 14 weeks after the complaint was filed. The findings covered 11 months of overbilling, 31 residents, a total of $182,400 in fraudulent administrative services charges. Carruthers lost his health care administrator's license. He entered into a restitution agreement with the Attorney General's office. The 31 families received refund calculations. Elena Vasquez's refund was $4,316. Nora did not attend any of the proceedings. She was working, which was the shape her life had taken and did not change overnight. The things that changed were quieter and slower and felt more like a gradual restoration of pressure than a dramatic alteration of anything. The second urgent care shift came off her schedule in June. It came off because the facility payment for July was covered, and August, and the credit line was closed, and the mathematics of her life had shifted by a margin that was not comfortable, but was survivable in a way the previous mathematics had not been. She dropped the Saturday house cleaning work in September. She kept the Maroa Avenue house one last time. She went through the kitchen, the grout, the windows, the baseboards, in the particular focused way she had learned to do it, efficiently and without resentment, because resentment costs energy, and energy was what she had been managing carefully for 2 years. Patricia left the $80 in the envelope on the counter, and Nora took it and drove home. In October, her mother had a stretch of 4 good days, which was unusual, and which the care coordinator, Renata, told her quietly should be understood as a gift and not a trend. Her mother sat in the common room near the window and named all the roses she had grown on Talman Avenue in the order they bloomed. The yellow climber first. In March, then the dark red hybrid tea, then the small pink cluster roses that came in June and covered the fence rail and were her mother's favorites, because they were not impressive, she said. They were just happy to be there. Nora sat beside her and wrote the names down. She drove south afterward through the flat November light and parked in front of the bar on the south end of Fresno, whose name was stenciled in plain block letters above the door. She had been here twice before. She knew the steel door and the square window and the way the man who held the door open assessed her in one flat second. Dennis was in his usual place at the far end of the bar. He looked up when she came in, and that was his greeting. He nodded at the stool beside him. She sat down. He set a glass of water in front of her. Because he had asked her once early on if she drank, and she had said not really, and he had not asked again. The room had 8 men in it tonight, and they had all registered her arrival and returned to their own conversations in the way a room does when it has decided someone belongs in it, which is not a ceremony, just an absence of resistance. She put an envelope on the bar. "Restitution check," she said. $4,316. It came yesterday." He looked at it. He did not pick it up. "Good," he said. "I want you to know," she said. "I knew," he said. She looked at the envelope. "Of course you did," she said. A corner of his mouth moved in a direction that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it. He lifted his water glass. She lifted hers. They sat with that for a moment, the bar's ambient sound around them, the crack of pool balls at the table, a burst of low laughter from the far corner. "My mother named all her roses today," Nora said. "In order, all of them." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a good day," he said. "It was," she said. Outside, the November night had come down dark and clear, and the lot was full of motorcycles, lined in their patient rows, chrome catching the parking lights, and the mountains were invisible in the dark, but she knew they were there, the way you always know a thing is there once you have learned the direction to look. She sat at the bar and finished her water, and did not feel the weight of the previous 2 years in the specific way she had felt it every day for those 2 years. The grinding down, the invisible attrition, the $47 bank account, and the 4-hour sleep and the grout brush on a stranger's kitchen floor. The weight was still there. It does not go anywhere that fast, that kind of accumulated weight. What was different was that she was not carrying it alone in the dark anymore, and the difference between carrying something alone in the dark and carrying something with people who know the direction of the weight is the whole difference. She had not known that until now. She knew it now. She did not cry. Her composure was not a wall she was holding up. It was something that had been given back to her gradually. The way a good night of sleep gives something back, not all at once, but by degrees, each degree mattering. Dex appeared at the end of the bar, laptop under his arm, and set it on the stool beside her without ceremony. "Got something for the complaint documentation," he said. "Supporting materials in case the Attorney General wants supplemental evidence. You don't have to look at it now." "I'll look at it now," she said. He opened the laptop. She leaned in. Dennis did not look over. He refilled his water glass from the pitcher behind the bar. He watched the room with those pale eyes, measuring, noting, the way a man does who has been watching rooms for 30 years and finds in the watching something that other men find in stillness. Outside, a new set of headlights swept across the lot as another motorcycle pulled in, the engine low and steady and then quieting. And in the bar, nobody moved because nobody needed to. And for the first time in 2 years, 4 months, and some number of days she had stopped counting, Nora Vasquez was not anywhere she needed to escape from. The roses bloomed in order. March, then the dark red, then the small pink cluster in June. She had written them all down. If the weight of that year, the loneliness of carrying something no one could see you carrying, has ever sat on your chest the way this story sat on the chest of someone who had nowhere left to look, share it with someone who would understand. Stories like this one find the people who need them.